Welcome to WitchLit, a place to talk about the craft of writing and writing the craft. I'm your host, Victoria Rashke, author, publisher, witch, and nosy Scorpio. WitchLit is brought to you by Thousand Bolt Press, a family-owned independent publisher established to produce the books we want to see in the world. Titles including Changing Paths by Yvonne Abarrow, Conjuring the Commonplace by Lane Fuller and Corey Thomas Hutchison, and my latest book, Verona Green, can be purchased directly from thousandvoltpress.com or wherever you buy books. Frater Barrabbas Tiresias is a practicing ritual magician who has studied magic and the occult for over 40 years. He believes that ritual magic is a discipline whose mystery is unlocked by continual practice and by occult experiences and revelations. Frater Barrabbas believes that traditional approaches should be balanced with creativity and experimentation, and that no occult or magical tradition is exempt from changes and revisions. Over the years, he found that his practical magical discipline was the real source for all his creative efforts. That creative process helped him build and craft a unique and different kind of magical system, one that is quite unlike any other, yet based on common Wiccan practices. So despite its uniqueness, this magical system is capable of being easily adapted and used by others. Frater Barrabbas is also the founder of a magical order called the Order of the Gnostic Star, and he is an elder and lineage holder in the Alexandrian tradition of witchcraft. He's published several books, including Spirit Conjuring for Witches, Elemental Powers for Witches, Talismanic Magic for Witches, and the 3-volume work Mastering the Art of Ritual Magic. His most recent publication is Sacramental Theurgy for Witches from Crossed Crow Books. Frater Barrabbas, welcome to WitchLit.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming on.
I'm pleased to be here.
Oh, well, we're pleased to have you. And I feel like we have a lot of ground to cover and a lot to talk about. But our first question for everybody on the show is, especially in this age of video and social media and, book banning, even like just this kind of like dearth or the always proposed dearth of publishing, why still write books?
Well, I feel I've felt for many years, all the way back to the early 90s, the need to publish what I do, because what I have built and developed over the years is different than what of a lot of other individuals perform, whether they're witches or whether they're ceremonial magicians or ritual magicians. But I just felt this urge. Plus, the spiritual connections that I have, particularly my personal goddess and all of that. This is something that she has urged me to do. And some of the spirits that I have worked with and have also wanted this information to be published. And now that I'm kind of getting older, I just turned 69. I also feel an urge to leave this behind as a legacy. I don't know how many years I have left on this planet, but I figure I'm going to write it all up in books because, that makes it more accessible. You can take a book and then you can, work with it and do whatever you need with it. And it's transportable. I mean, you don't need to have the internet connection for it. To me, it's more personal. And so I wrote these books kind of like an older, experienced witch and ritual magician talking to a group of people who are not as knowledgeable as I am, so that I can share this information with them in a kind of intimate sort of setting, sort of, like what you and I are doing right now.
I read your blog. I always do a little bit of internet sleuthing on guests. And there was an article, one of the posts you wrote was about like kind of deciding to write and wanting to share the work and then not really having been a writer, like getting to that point. So do you want to talk about that a little bit? Like kind of going from like, I want this out there, but I don't feel like I have the skill set yet. Or how did you kind of work on that and build up to publishing?
I didn't have the skill set at all. if you look at my dedication in my books, my wife, Joni, is always one of the dedicants because she basically taught me how to write books. And, the very first book I wrote, which is called The Pyramid of Powers, has never been published because it was so poorly written. I literally had to teach myself how to write because writing is not something that's pushed as much in universities or colleges. Writing term papers and that kind of stuff is more rudimentary, and the expectations are low. Unless you're getting a degree in literature. Now, when you start getting into the master's and doctorate program, then it's expected that you are much more literate. So I managed to get through college without what I would say a real commanding ability to be able to express myself through writing. And so I had to develop that much later in my life. Started in the 90s when I was in my 30s that I actually started developing this capability. And it took decades. It took 2 decades for me to be, capable of being able to write stuff that doesn't need to be massively edited.
Yeah. I mean, it is definitely a discipline unto itself, I think, writing.
Oh, yes. However, once you get it down, then it becomes easier and easier. You learn the tricks. You can take the amount of time it takes me to write a book now, and we're talking about not a sizable sized book. It takes less and less time to be able to pull that material together, even for something that you don't like. I may have the rituals for it, but the background and explaining how all of this is used and worked is something that I have to write up.
Mm-hmm.
So, where I might be rich in terms of rituals and ordeals that I can present, explaining how to work them and how they work is what I have to apply, and I've gotten it down now.
Mm-hmm. Do you find joy in writing now, or?
Yes, I enjoy writing. Although my wife tells me that it has caused me to become something of a hermit, and that it's perhaps too comfortable, and it also adds to a sedentary lifestyle that is probably not healthy for me. So, there has to be a little bit more balance. For instance, when COVID started, um, I wrote up um, elemental powers for witches, and and then I wrote up talismanic magic for witches, and then I wrote up sacramental theurgy for witches, and then I wrote up transformative initiation for witches, and so you know by the end of 2023, I've written in 4 books, and so that's from 2020 to 2023. I wrote 4 books. So yeah, I'm driven, but I need balance in my life, and because I didn't have any social life because of COVID, it allowed me to do that. But I don't think I can get away with that in the future.
I mean, I think that is one thing. It's solitary work, obviously, for a lot of us. And then you're right, it does kind of increase sedentary. I can't say that word. It increases being sedentary. But I think it can be isolating, not just solitary, because you're kind of in your own world when you're writing.
Yep.
And so, yeah, I can see how your wife might think you're a hermit.
Yeah, I have not connected with the Richmond witchcraft and pagan community, although that is about to change because I've connected with a woman who owns a store called Mama Luna's, and she's got a beautiful store in Richmond. You know, it's massive. It has everything in there, from crystals and magical tools to, you know, herbs and all kinds of books. And it even has an area that you can go into that's kind of like an internal sacred space area where people can get together and have some tea and, you know, herbal tea and talk about this stuff. I mean, she's just incredible. Plus, if you own a store, you know, after a while, practically everybody. And so, you know, she's going to be kind of my uh, helper in regards to, you know, connecting to the community. The previous communities that I lived in, like Minneapolis, that community, I was very much connected to. I was very much connected to Atlanta and Tallahassee, even New Mexico, which has a tiny witchcraft community. Um, and in Kansas City, I was so connected that I actually helped start a pagan festival, which is still going on today, known as Heartland Pagan Festival. It has They have Camp Gaia, so they have their own pagan campground in which to celebrate this on, and their one of their focuses is pagan and witchcraft music, and they've got a you know, kind of an indoor outdoor music festival area where they can, you know, they can play music.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think playing, I mean, I recently moved during the pandemic to the West Coast from East Tennessee. And
Oh
yeah,
wow!
that stepping into a new community is challenging in a lot of ways. And especially I'm in Silicon Valley, which is not known for witches. There are a few of us.
Really?
But well, I mean, I think more East Bay in San Francisco than Silicon Valley.
Oh
But I mean, we're around, obviously.
yes.
but,
Um,
but like the bigger stores are not in this part. They're in San
right.
Francisco or they're on the coast in Santa
Were
Cruz.
you
And
in the
so
Gatlinburg area of Tennessee?
I was in Knoxville, actually. So not far from Gatlinburg.
Oh, I know
Yeah.
Knoxville well because I lived in Atlanta for a while,
Yeah. Right up 75.
right up
So,
75.
yeah. Yeah. I actually grew up in East Tennessee. So that's my background. But
Well, my wife grew up in Atlanta, Georgia, so maybe
okay,
someday
yeah.
you can cross paths with her.
She may also have that, what do they call it? That I-75 corridor accent.
It's very possible. I'll have to ask her about it.
Yeah, I always joke. I did a year abroad in college in Slovenia, and I was there for a year. And so the folks who were taking care of us, anytime there were Americans around, they would invite us to stuff. And there was a linguist conference there, or linguist conference. And so one of the gentlemen, I think his name was Tom Priestley, which is also another person's name, which I'm always hesitant because I'm like, was his name really Tom Priestley, or am I remembering that wrong? But he was a linguist, and he was at a university in Canada. And I introduced myself and I said a couple things, and he was like, "Oh, you're from Knoxville." And I
Oh,
mean, it just like blew me away. But yeah, apparently there is this very specific Southern I-75 corridor accent that
yeah.
runs from Atlanta into Kentucky.
My
So
accent is from southeastern Wisconsin. That's where I grew up. So when I was a little witchling, I grew up in a town called Racine
I know Racine.
and
Yeah.
had about 90,000 people.
Yeah.
It's in between Milwaukee and Chicago, along with Kenosha.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's the area that I grew up. I still have family and friends in the area.
Okay.
Um, and, you know, Cross Crow Books is in Chicago, and I'm pretty familiar with Chicago as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But I don't talk like I'm from Chicago.
No, you don't have a Chicago, what I would consider a Chicago accent. But I kind of want to ask about like growing up on the Great Lakes. I mean, and do you have like a magical affinity for that
Oh,
too? Like for the
yes.
land there? Because I was born in Michigan. I was born in Detroit, so on the east side. And my
Mhm.
family is largely from Michigan on my dad's side. And so I have this like affinity for the Great Lakes, I guess. And so I would
Oh,
imagine for
yes.
actually growing up there.
Great Lakes are beautiful, and they're also extremely cold.
Yes.
um, but And they've cleaned them up quite a bit too from what they were when I was um, young. I lived through a time when the Great Lakes were polluted, and then they cleaned them up. Lake Michigan wasn't quite as bad as Lake Erie or some of the other smaller lakes.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, think of it this way: as a witch, if you are going to set a magic circle and establish the cardinal directions to a specific element, you might actually choose the elements that represent the geographic area where you live.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, the east is the lake, which would be water.
Right. Yeah, it is funny. I have thought about that in moving from east to west is like a sunset. Now we're much more sunset oriented in a lot of ways than sunrise oriented, because if you go to the beach, you really want to go for the sunset, not the sunrise.
Yeah.
That's changed a lot. And I think
Now
about
you see the because you're in the west, um, you will see the sun set over the waters,
yeah.
not rise.
Mm-hmm. Well, in East Tennessee, like the immediate east was mountains. So it almost felt like that should be the earth element, because the Appalachians were to the east of where I was. And so, yeah, I agree. I see that a lot. I think it is more about where you are.
And one should have the kind of flexibility to be able to make those kinds of adjustments. And to me, those are creative adjustments that are very experiential and experimental. You're taught like, well, the elements correspond to the four directions in this manner, and this is the tradition, but that's, not true. There are a lot of variations on how you actually place the associated four elements to the four directions.
I would say, and across world traditions, there's some argument about what the elements actually constitute, like what constitutes the elements.
So. Native Americans have a different perspective on it. So do the Asians, the Chinese.
And I always think of like Druidry, like it's, water, land, and sky rather than like ocean, land, and sky or something. So yeah, I mean, it's interesting to me, like it's all different, which I think is what I enjoyed about your book, is this idea that though we have these traditions and we're drawing on these things, like even like you in your book, some pre-Vatican Catholic rite, none of this is set in stone for us. Yes, it is written down and we're looking at it in books, but there's a lot to, it's not even what works for you. It's like what works, I guess, almost.
Well, the whole premise of sacramental theurgy for witches is basically that, if you work with something that has been blessed, charged, and consecrated by a deity, then that thing is imbued with the essence of that deity, and it can be used as a sacrament or as a magical tool, or in many different ways. And this was a real common concept in medieval Catholicism. And what Catholicism has been trying to do over the last 120 years is to start eliminating that and removing that from their religion, because the mass and blessings and the host and the wine as sacraments and the holy water and all of this stuff was being used for uncanonical purposes. And because there was a mindset of, well, these things are imbued by God. And so it's not just a normal, unleavened wafer of bread or wine or water that has a little bit of salt in it, or a balm or oil that's used in chrismation. These are things that are alive with the energy and even the sense of the deity. And that's a very, very ancient magical concept that goes all the way back. I don't know how far back, but it certainly predates Catholicism. And in fact, we can see this in how things were seen and practiced in antiquity. And of course, now the big question for witches is this: well, how do you bless something that's going to be a sacrament and considered to be imbued with, the essence of a deity? And the most direct way of doing that is in the Godhead assumption, or what we call the draw, where someone draws down a deity into themselves temporarily, and in that state they bless things. They blow their breath upon it. They kiss it. They make a sign over it. They touch it. All of these things are basically imbuing that tool or that substance with the essence of that God.
Mm-hmm.
And it can be used later on for magical purposes. So, you've got the ceremony of cakes and wine, which is the communion portion to be performed after the Godhead assumption. And, the cakes and wines are consumed, but they could be used for other things.
Mm-hmm.
And the same thing, the same mechanism that blesses the athame and charges it, as well as the wand that you're going to be using, in your liturgical and magical rites, that can be extended to do other things as well, like charge and bless an amulet. But the idea behind all of this is to bring the deity down from a transcendental quality to an immanent quality, where it can be something that is tangible to you and to other individuals who are taking part in that kind of working.
Yeah. And one of the, just thinking about the aspecting or drawing down the gods, one of the things in the book that I really enjoyed and had not really thought about or seen was the levels of how, successful. I'm not really sure how I'd put that, of how successful the person has been in drawing down the deity or the moon or, whatever they're drawing down. And I liked that it was, because I think one of the things, because it's part of my tradition, that working is part of my tradition. And it's one of those things that as you are doing it, it's so easy to second guess yourself and doubt, or to, as you point out, or think you've done it better than you did. So I think that to have this kind of reference and say, these are the things that you'll see, and to have that control of the questions was really interesting.
You're referring to the control question,
Mm-hmm.
which the coven thinks up, but the person who's going to be doing the Godhead assumption is sequestered and is not aware of.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, to me, to mix being in charge of and being an authority figure or taking on that kind of a role in a coven at the same time that you are going to be channeling deity, I think is a problem, because so often I've seen it being abused. Granted, there are high priestesses out there in the various traditions who wouldn't think of abusing that, but it bolsters their power in the sight of everyone else, because not only are you an authority figure, but you have connection with the deity. When I really strongly believe that that's something that everyone should take part in, and take turns in having that kind of experience. Because if everyone can experience a Godhead assumption, and they can actually achieve a certain level to it, that means that all of us then equally are in connection with the deity, and that we can talk to and have a dialogue with that deity.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, that's a fundamental part of witchcraft and paganism in our modern age. Is all of us all of us have recourse to connecting directly to the deity. I mean, this is the whole thing that makes witchcraft and paganism so inimical to established traditions, because established traditions have specialized people who do that for the people.
Mm-hmm.
But it means that you are not allowed to do that.
Right.
And if you've got that in a coven where, oh well, the high priestess draws down the moon, nobody else does that, because it might get carried away, it might lead to things, and yes, it would lead to everyone having access to the gods, which is what should be happening.
Right. Well, it seems more consistent. I mean, yes, I guess there in antiquity, there were priest class too, but I feel like people had much more direct relation with their gods in a lot of antiquity, either through household gods or through like obviously many, many observances and things that happened all the time. And I feel like, with modernity, it's kind of like depending on the religion, it's, like your Wednesday and Sunday, or, obviously other more established mainstream religion like Islam, like you pray 5 times a day. So clearly that is part of your daily life in a way that is different.
Monotheism basically has created a distinct separation between deity and humanity.
Mm-hmm.
Neo-paganism and neo-witchcraft should do just the opposite. It should bring the deities into the conscious lives and bodies of the people who worship them.
Mm-hmm.
That, to me, is the only way that we can retrieve once and for all what paganism and witchcraft really stand for.
Yeah.
Because witchcraft, people say that witchcraft is the magic. I say that witchcraft is the magic in alignment to and through the gods and goddesses. And there's a little bit of difference between me and what some of the other people are saying about that. But I feel that you unless you have an intimate relationship with deity, that you cannot really function and work magic at the level which we should be working, in order to make dramatic and transformative changes in your life.
Yeah. Oh, I was thinking just a lot of folks I've had on the show and a lot of folks I've talked to are my age or younger. I'm 51. And, either came to witchcraft like in the 90s or 2000s for the most part. That seems to be. But so I kind of want to ask you, just because I have the opportunity to ask you like what your, like having a longer view of things, like where do you think things are going, I guess, in the witchcraft occult community? Like what do you see as someone who's been around a little bit longer?
Where I think things are going is, I think that we are very much on the threshold of a powerful new age. During the it's really kind of odd. During the 60s and 70s, it was a new thing, and we believed that it was the old religion, even though really it wasn't. It wasn't something that had been invented by Gerald Gardner and some others. They crafted and created this new religion and basically wanted to cloak it in in the ancient religion. But that wasn't really true. But we didn't discover that until later on. So we kind of went along with this sort of overly optimistic and overly simplistic way of looking at things. And that was very much the 60s and the 70s. I mean, sometimes it was, people were frivolous, but they were all generally optimistic. The 80s started to degrade that, especially with the ascent of Ronald Reagan. And what I began to see then was a certain amount of persecution and blowback from Christian fundamentalism. And that has continued to grow. But now that we've, come from the 90s into the 80s and 90s and into the 2000 period, and now into the teens and then the 20s. I'm seeing that fundamentalism and extreme Christianity and Christian nationalism has sort of achieved its zenith. And I think it's now starting to crumble and fall apart. Less young people are engaging in those sorts of religious perspectives, and a lot more of them are basically disenchanted and looking for something.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that what you're going to see is the traditional initiatory lineages and all that really lost a lot of power in the last 20 some years. And I think that they're starting to come back because people want to have a structure in order to go through the process of learning this stuff. But I think, on the other hand, I think that young people will not be tolerant of authoritarian figures and other people telling them that they must do this or that and not really explain to them why.
Mm-hmm.
I think that that's, and there are knuckleheads out there in our tradition who do just that. Well, it's tradition, you're supposed to, but when they ask questions in church, the same thing was told them. Well, this is how we believe. This is our faith. This is tradition. Instead, if someone comes up with something like that, if I happen to be working with some people or sharing with them, I'll go, wow, that's a novel idea. You should do some experimentation to figure out if it's just a novel idea or if you're really onto something. So I'll encourage people to, experiment and to try different things and to learn and grow and to build up their lore so that their personal book of shadows is just burgeoning with all sorts of rituals that they've worked or intend on working.
I think, again, that's, like I said, that's one of the things I really appreciated about the book and about your work in general is this idea that it is something that changes and grows with your experience. And, I like the idea that things aren't written in stone.
If you don't take, okay, so there's the Book of Shadows, and then there's the lineage information and all that associated with the line, and there's all these books out there. Okay, there's all this material, and there's people on YouTube are doing nutty, crazy things or cool things, so that's all fine and good. But unless you gather all of that together and make it yours and make it your personal thing, then you really can't call yourself a witch. You really can't call yourself much of anything because all you're doing is you're focusing on all this stuff out here and you're not bringing it together into your own life, making it part of your life. Mm-hmm. And that's what I think needs to happen. It can't be the superficial thing of kicks and trends and stuff like that you're doing. It's got to be something that you grasp and make your own. So you take all these rituals and all that stuff, and you play around with them, and you you line them up with deities that make sense to you, and then you practice them, and as time goes on, you continue to evolve them, and you come up with new ideas, new shiny things that you pull into your lore, and your lore grows, and you share that lore with other people, which helps objectify it. And and they'll look at some stuff and say, "What the heck is this?" or "Hey, that's really cool. I think I'll borrow that." And so this kind of exchange, this objectification and exchange with like-minded people, really causes that lore to mature. I mean, so I was doing all this magic pretty much on my own after I left the covenant or got booted out of it, depending upon your perspective. And I had these people come to me. This is when I was living in Kansas City, who asked me, "Well, we want you to help us put together a magical order, and you have all this and all these rituals and all that stuff, but we don't want to use your personal rituals. We want to have rituals that are meaningful to all of us." So we worked together to take the ritual structures and ideas that I had and to put them into something that we could all identify with and belonged to all of us. That objectified everything that I had done individually and by myself, and brought it out into such a context that it was something that I could hand to other people and they could work it. So what I've done over the years since that enlightening time that happened back in the mid 80s is I've applied that to everything. So all these idiosyncrasies have been sort of removed or pulled out of my work. And what I've done is objectify it so that it's meaningful, not just to me, but to, to a whole groups of people.
Yeah. And I like that thread kind of goes through like this whole Four Witches series is like it in parts. The other thing I really like in this book, and I think a lot of people who are familiar with a lot of books that were published in the 80s and 90s, you say, I talk about this in Elemental Powers, but here's what you need to know to do this right now without having to go look at the other book. And I so appreciate that it's not, I'm not going to name names, but I'm sure you remember or know, like, see page, blah, 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 in my previous book. And you're like, well, I don't have that right now. That was kind of a common trope in magic and witchcraft books, I think, from the 80s and 90s. So it's nice to have, I don't know, it just feels thoughtful, I guess, when you're reading the book, that I think it's really easy, especially when talking about things that are more ritualistic or ritual magic, is to take this, it's not even an academic tone. It's kind of beyond that. It's almost that thee, thou tone, and it makes it impenetrable as a reader.
It's experiential. I'm sitting down at the fireside talking to, we have 6 cats, by the way.
The podcat has made an appearance for listeners since you can't see what's going on.
I love kitties. Any rate, it's, I'm basically interested in coming down to a certain level and being able to relate to and talk to people through my books, so that they can take the information that I'm giving them and go and do something. My whole theory of how to, acquire any of this is to go and do it. So what I want to do is I want to give you rituals, and I want to give you, things to think about and things to try and do yourself, so that you can go out and have these experiences for yourself. Because don't take it from me. I'm doing my own thing here. You cannot rely on anything that I say as being the gospel truth. It has to be proven by people experiencing and discovering for themselves that it's true. The whole thing about talismanic magic for witches, for instance. I'm telling everybody, trust me, talismans are really powerful, but go out, do some talismanic work yourself, and and try and give that a shot. And with that in mind, I'm not just giving, this is how it's done. I'm giving you an example. Like, okay, these are the components that you need to make this talisman and all that. And I show, okay, here's an example. So we've got this example, and we'll gather together everything that we need to do this, and then we'll pick a time when to do this, and I go through all of that stuff, which is the stuff that I go through when I actually, I'm going to perform this ritual or these rituals and make this happen. I just feel that that's the way in which to communicate the knowledge of magic, because it's so subjective that the only way that you're ever going to really understand it, to have that eureka moment, is by doing it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think especially as a book nerd myself, it's easy to be an armchair witch, I guess, and just read about it. But yeah, I don't think you realize the power, or really start to, as you said, kind of coalesce your own practice until you're doing, and what really works, and where you can see that power.
I see the cat. Cats have lots of power.
Yeah.
The 5 books in the Four Witches series are all what I would call extra or above or beyond the Book of Shadows.
Mm-hmm.
Book of Shadows does not have any of this information in it. And I'm almost certain that the lineage papers that you might receive if you were initiated into a specific branch of witchcraft, be it Alexandrian, Gardnerian, or whatever, there are quite a few number of other traditions as well. This is all information that I developed years and years ago, and that I believe that I've to a certain extent perfected. Although the process is not done. So the idea is, okay, this is how I have done this. Here's some examples. People can go out and then work this magic and then come back and say, yeah, that was pretty good, except I did it this way, and kind of, added this little piece to it over
Mm-hmm.
here, and this little part right here, was kind of overblown and all that. So I kind of, tamped it down or removed it.
Mm-hmm.
And in my ritual, I felt really worked really good.
Yeah.
And my approach to that would be great. You're evolving the process.
Mm-hmm.
Write it down, share it with other people.
Yeah. I used to be a culinary instructor, and I always used to tell people, when you get a new recipe, do it the way they tell you to do it the first time. So you know what the purpose was. And then make it yours. Then it belongs to you.
Yep.
And, it's why, like, if you look at like any national dish or whatever, it's like every home cook has their own version of whatever this thing is, right? They add a different spice, they cook it a different way, and I think that I don't really consider myself a kitchen witch anymore, because I'm kind of at the point in my life where, like, I just kind of cook because I have to eat. But like, I do think there is something to that, of bringing that knowledge of, like, it's a guidepost, not a straitjacket.
Yep. I would never say to someone, you can't do that,
Mm-hmm.
because they already did, and it worked for them.
And it worked. And they didn't burn as long as they don't burn. I always tell people, as long as you don't burn your house down or hurt yourself or someone else, see if it works.
There was a ceremonial magician who conjured a goetic demon to get money because he was really broke. And guess what happened? Soon after he did that, not exactly at the time, but within, a couple of days or so, his house burned down. And the insurance money that he got paid so that he could, he didn't want to live there anyways. There was nothing lost that he regretted so much.
Yeah.
It basically allowed him to get out from under something that was, crushing him financially.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, well, the magic worked. But some
worked.
people are like, yeah, you invoked a goetic demon and your house burned down. That's really a good sign of being incompetent. But in a way,
worked out.
It worked out. So, who
So
am
maybe
I?
do burn your house down.
Who am I to
Even
judge?
that is not a stricture.
Who am I to judge someone's results and all of that? And I've seen people work magic and do things that, literally cause me to go, what the heck are they doing? I mean, it worked.
Mm-hmm.
They managed to pull it off. I don't know, because of the zeal or passion or whatever, but but from an aesthetic standpoint, there is a way of being able to work magic and to kind of revise and perfect what it is that you're working on. And I really am a proponent of that. There's a certain aesthetics associated with ritual and with temple performance of rituals and that kind of stuff. And I do believe that people should kind of, work towards that.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're doing something and it works for you, who am I to judge that?
Yeah. So kind of a little bit of a shift, but I wanted to be sure to ask you about this. So you have published with other publishers in the past, and you've kind of moved to Crosscrow Books. And I'm just curious, like, what that experience of publishing has been like. Because you have how many books? You have like 6 books coming out in 2024. Is that right?
Yes.
Like, wow, for one, and for two, like, what was that like? Changing publishers and all of that kind of stuff.
It was heartbreaking, actually. I mean, I'd been with Llewellyn for 10 years. Um, and Llewellyn taught me how to write books. I mean, they were tough. The acquisition editor, whose name I will not name, but she was very hard on me, but she was very fair.
Mm-hmm.
And the end product was a much better book than what I had originally submitted. So I mean, I have to give her a lot of credit for basically getting me to get rid of some habits in my writing that were really bad. Um, but 10 years with a publisher is a long time if you think about it. And so this book here is what killed it. Sacramental Theurgy for Witches. You've read it. I assume that you liked it.
Mm-hmm.
Llewellyn rejected it. We had signed a contract for it. The artwork in it, Keith Ward, my friend, had already done the artwork. And I presented this when I had a meet and greet at Llewellyn Publications in Minnesota, in Minneapolis, because I went to a convention called Paganicon, which is, they had a little over 1,000 people show up from all over. So, it was pretty cool. I taught a class there, and it was pretty good. And I happened to meet the Malloway brothers while I was there. They were there from one of their other authors, giving that person support. And and Blake was like, "Wow, I'd really like to publish one of your books really bad." And he gave me his card and all of this stuff and all of that. And I said, "Well, I'm really booked with Llewellyn, so I don't think that's going to be able to happen." And but then when I got home, this was March of last year. I got home, and within just a few days, like 4 or 5 days, I got an email back from my acquisitions editor saying that they were not interested. Llewellyn was not interested in going further with Sacramental Theurgy for Witches because they felt that it was unmarketable, and decided not to go with it. And of course, that means that the fifth book in the series, the book in Transformative Initiation for Witches, that one wouldn't be published either.
Mm-hmm.
And, I was heartbroken. I mean, I'd gone there, I met the people at Llewellyn, I was one of their star authors at Paganicon and all of this stuff. And then all of a sudden that happens. And I was sort of astonished. And I was hurt by it too,
Mm-hmm.
Even though it was just business. It was a business decision on their part. I should not have taken it personally.
Not the direction that they're going with their
But it was
stuff,
hard not to.
Yeah, it's always hard not to take it personally because your writing is your baby in a lot of ways.
You got it. Just like my kitties. But at any rate, so I sent an email off to Blake and said, "Hey,
by the way,
my book and all that." And he was like, "Oh, we want it." And I said, "What about Transformative Initiation for Witches? We want it." And while I was at that convention, several people came up to me and said, "Well, it's really great you've got all these advanced books, but we want a beginner's book. What about people who are just starting out? How do we get the information that's needed so that we can start reading these more advanced books?" And I tell you, I swore I would not write a beginner's book. I'm not going to do that. No, you can't make me do that. But, even a couple of store owners said, well, we had people, who were really interested in your books and all that. But some of them felt that they were too advanced and felt that they needed the beginner's book. So I said, oh, okay. So just to show you, it took me 4 weeks to write Mastering the Art of Witchcraft. And that will be coming out in July of this year.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a beginner's book, but it's not like any other beginner's book on witchcraft. As a book, it's 50% liturgical work and 50% magic.
Mm-hmm.
And it starts out with the liturgical work because it is my belief that if you are going to work magic, that you need to establish a relationship with the gods. The whole book is, okay, you might be in a coven, then again, you might not be in a coven, but irregardless, in your own home, in your own space, in your own life, you're going to do all these exercises and meditations and everything else. And you're also going to, celebrate the full moon and the Sabbats. And here's some magical rituals for you to do for that. But it's a 2-year program.
Mm-hmm.
If you follow this thing through for 2 years, and it's got rituals in it to do everything that you need to do, including dedicate yourself to the gods and goddesses, and in addition to that, to also work with the simplistic aspects of the energy model of magic, which would be, variation on the cone of power. All of that is in there. And if you do that and follow that book for 2 years, you'll be able to pick up spirit conjuring for witches and use it. So it doesn't go into astrology. It doesn't go into planetary stuff. It doesn't go into pagan mythology or any of this other stuff.
Mm-hmm.
It tells you how you should go about finding a pantheon for yourself, and the fact that you need to have more than just a god and goddess in your tradition. You need to have gods and goddesses.
Mm-hmm.
And you need to also be aware of the fact that there are spirits and gods and goddesses and all that all over the place, including in your backyard, and that you need to approach everything so that you can sense, feel, and connect and align yourself with all of those intelligences and powers that are all around you. So this book will open the door to the 5 books. So it's part of that series. And it's actually going to come out in hardcover as well as a soft cover.
Yeah, I do like that about Cross Crows Editions. They're doing a really nice job with that.
They're also really super nice people. I mean, all of them, and they're the Balloway brothers are like. It's hard to explain. Both of them wear glasses, and they have this sort of I don't know, Chicago sort of cosmopolitan sort of look about them, and Wick is dressed up like he's some kind of avant-garde artist, and they're just really nice. They said to me, Brian, I don't know what kind of relationship you had with Llewellyn, but to us, you're a rock star. And I knocked off 6 books for them. So they're basically going to be taking my 2 first books, Disciples Guide to Ritual Magic and Mastering the Art of Ritual Magic, where I spell magic with an MAGICK, which has lent some people to call me a ceremonial magician, which is sort of almost an insult. Because ceremonial magicians themselves looked over some of my work some time ago and said that my magic stinks of witchcraft. And as far as I'm concerned, I was like, yeah, it does. It stinks of witchcraft because I'm a witch.
There you go. Yeah.
But, I've been practicing magic for 40 some years, and I have 35 years of ritual material that has never been published anywhere. And this year, I should say last year, I started to actually put that out. And so two books are going to be coming out, and that's one of them is called Liber Nephilim, which is dealing with the Nephilim, the angels who saw the daughters of men and desired them and came down to earth and married them and had children, who were also called the Nephilim. And they were called Hanshe Hashem, men of renown or greatness. But I'm sure that there were daughters who were probably just as powerful too.
Mm-hmm.
And if you consider that I managed to discover that the daughters that these angels came down and got into relationships with, these were the daughters of Lilith. And so you have the daughters of Lilith and you have the Nephilim, and they come together. And you've got Enoch, who also was sort of knocking around, and he was friends with the Nephilim. And so this is the source, the actual core of the Enochian system of magic.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Interesting. Yeah, no, that sounds fascinating. I'm in.
And then the last book I wrote, which I just finished after during the holidays, is called The Abramelin Lunar Ordeal. And the Abramelin working is a 14th century, maybe 15th century grimoire that is of German origin. It was written by a man named Abraham the Jew of Worms. And it was about the mage he met named Abramelin. And what it has is an ordeal in it that somebody has to undergo extreme meditation, prayer, atonement. They don't perform any magic or do any occult stuff whatsoever. And they do this. One of the books and the version of it that Mathers published required a year with 1 month of being completely sequestered. That means that you only had contact with people who were in your house and nobody else. That means you didn't work. Mm-hmm. All you did was intensify, praying to God and, atoning for your sins and basing yourself and all of this stuff. The actual German tradition of this is 18 months with 3 months of being sequestered. And who in the heck can do that?
Yeah, I read that version last year for fun in my free time.
By Den. Yeah, Den and
yeah. And I was like, this is not for me.
Yes, but there might be something to it that could be for you. And that's where the Abramelin Lunar Ordeal comes in, because the actual German traditional version of this spans the Passover and the Feast of the Tabernacles, which are 6 months apart in the Jewish calendar. And so there are 3 periods of 6 months, 18 months altogether, in which you are engaged in this working. Well, but I'm not really big on the solar cycles and all that as much as I am the lunar cycles. Those are more important to me, right? So what would the equivalent be in terms of lunar cycles? It would be from new moon to full moon, back to new moon. So that's a full cycle. And then to full moon. Approximately 42 days. So you have a working that lasts 42 days. And because it's such a short period, I had to fill it with a bunch of incredibly intensive magical workings, because I am an initiate already. So I can work all this high magic. And so what I did was I conjured all of the 4 seraphim and cherubim and pulled them together into a vortex so that they were unified. And then upon that, I invoked an element Godhead associated with the element of water. And that became, all that energy came together. So you had this Godhead and you had these powerful super archangels all in this structure fused and merged together into a vortex. And then within that, I created what is known as a double gateway. So you normally an east and west gateway represents the transformative initiation cycle of the hero or heroine. You enter into the underworld and then you come out changed and transformed and transfigured. And so, but above that, so you have the eastern and western gates, and then above that is a gate that is connected to the north and south watchtowers. And so you've got this crossroad of you know um, these gateways, and everything is focused on the ultra point in the circle, creating what we call the gateway of ascension. And upon that, I perform the bornless rite, and the bornless rite has 4 levels. It goes up through the Kabbalistic worlds of from Asiya all the way up to Atziluth, like a pyramid. You're going to these different. And at the very top, there's an internal temple that's done, and there the bornless rite is performed. And I did this in 2009, and it literally blew my mind. I mean, I've never experienced anything quite as powerful or as transformative. And it's so, it's this is, of course, this is not for everybody. And this is sort of, a ritual magician, nerdy sort of, way of doing this. But what it does is it allows you to have a conversation with your holy guardian angel, or also known as your genius or higher self. And that did happen. And it was profound, not to mention the fact that when I invoked the element Godhead of water, I met the goddess who's been sort of moving things my entire life. From when I first got into witchcraft and was a little teenage witch to today. I also experienced a lot of inversion. I saw vistas and visions that I had when I was 17 years old reappear, except this time they actually had meaning to them. And what I believe happened is that when I was 17, going through these magical experiences, I was seeing things that I was doing when I was in my late 50s.
Interesting.
So that's and there will be more. I have several more projects that I'm going to work on, but right now I'm not going to do any writing for a while.
Take a break from the writing. Yeah. No, that I'm sure it sounds like your wife will appreciate.
Yeah, she is very patient, I have to say.
Good.
But
Good.
I think I've pushed her to the edge of her patience. And when I told her this is the last book I'm writing for a little while, she was like, "Good, then we can do stuff."
Sounds like a plan. Well, good. So before we get to our game of chance question, I wanted to give you a chance to kind of tell folks where to find you, and that you've already kind of shared what books are coming out. So where's the best place for people to find out more about your work?
My blog. There's I think there's close to 500 articles, and these are not 1-pagers or 2-pagers. Some of these are pretty extensive. So between my books and between my blog, there's a lot of really cool stuff in there that you can look at and you can work with and share. What I did not put into my blog in most cases were actual rituals, and that's gone into my books. But there's plenty of stuff in there. I mean, to become acquainted with me, I'm going to be going to Convocation. I don't know if you are familiar with that.
I haven't been, but I am familiar with it.
You should go.
Yeah, I am. I had planned maybe to go to Paganicon or Mystic South this year, and we're still very COVID conscious. My son has long COVID, so we're really careful.
Ooh.
So I just kind of feel like maybe Minneapolis in the cold is not the way to go. because I can't be
Oh,
outside to eat and stuff a lot.
well, it depends. I mean, when I was there last year, it was unseasonably cold.
Mm,
I mean, really cold. I mean,
yeah. Yeah, you
icy
just never
cold.
know. You just never know what you're going to get. But I would
You
like to
never
go to
know what you're going to get.
Convocation. Mostly
Convocation
because
is,
I'd like to go to Michigan, honestly.
Convocation is in Ann Arbor, Michigan,
Mhm.
which is 30 minutes away from Detroit. So,
Yeah. This is my old stomping grounds. Well, my
yeah,
infant stomping grounds, I should say.
yeah. I'm going to also try to be more available and all that, but there's not a lot of what I would call media stuff out there. I
Mhm.
don't do recordings or anything like that. I'm my Joni, my wife, has been pushing me to actually have conduct classes. You know, where I would, get in a long chair and all right, all my little witch friends and all that, and talk to them and regale them with some of the crazy stuff that I've done, especially when I was young. But some of that biographical material is actually in the blog. I've actually written about things that were going on with me when I was a teenager.
Mhm. You could always do fireside witch chats.
Yeah, but I just, I haven't. I also have a very demanding day job. Um, I'm into IT. That's what I do for a living.
Mhm.
I don't do. I don't sell books for occult books or witchcraft books for a living. I actually work in data warehousing. I'm a data warehouse architect,
Mhm.
and I work on creating data warehouses out of Medicaid data for states. So
Ooh,
that's the
yeah,
kind of
that's
work
pretty
that
demanding. Yeah.
it's pretty demanding. And for instance, I was in meetings until 6 o'clock this evening. So I had maybe an hour and a half the whole day that I wasn't in meetings. And so that doesn't give you a whole lot of
Doesn't
time.
give you a lot of time to do a lot of extra, right? Or anything else.
I'd like to actually someday, if I can retire, that's probably when I would like to have to do a lot of that stuff.
Mm-hmm. Well, I will wish that for you.
Well, thank you.
Awesome. So for our last question, I'm going to roll this lovely little purple die. And I always joke that, my Scorpio nature means I don't know how to do small talk, which is probably why I have a podcast. So I'm going to roll this die. And depending on what number I get, you'll get a question about death, sex, religion, politics, or money. And it's kind of related to your work or something we've talked about. And then if I roll a 6, you get to pick which one of those topics you would like. So here we go. Let's see what we get up. 2, sex. We didn't cover that.
I
So there you
knew
go.
it. I knew it.
So again, as an elder of the craft, and you talk about this a little bit in the book about like the different perspectives on gender and sexuality and on the role of sex in the craft. And how would you say, like in your time in the craft, that has changed, good or bad?
When I started out, the Alexandrians were the only ones who allowed um, transgender people to be involved in covens and to assume whatever genderized role that they wished. Also, we're talking about the early 70s, early to mid 70s, sex, drugs, rock and roll. Um, However, one thing that was going on that I noticed, although I didn't do it myself, was the use of a position of power and authority as well as deity to basically coerce um, members of the opposite sex or whatever to engage in sexual activity. In other
Mm-hmm.
words, there was coercion going on. And in some cases, this was really, really bad. Over the years, our community has basically talked about, well, done more than talk about. We've actually um, kicked people out or considered them to be persona non grata. because of sexual exploitation, harassment, or any kind of sexual assault. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, when a woman or a man, for that instance, comes into a traditional coven and you are expected to be sky clad, that means that a lot of the defenses that you might have, as well as the mystery of how you really look, underneath your clothes, all of that is gone, and you're very vulnerable. Now, the other people might be naked and all that too, but because you're experiencing it for the first time or whatever, it's intimidating. And so, people should basically understand that coming into a coven situation should be safe. And this should be safe no matter, whether you are a gay male or whether you are a lesbian or whether you are a transgender individual. You should be able to come into a coven and be respected as a person. Now, in terms of me, I've always been kind of a gentleman, or as this one woman put it down, your problem is, Brian, you're too nice. You're a nice guy. I don't like nice guys. I like bad boys, It's like, well, if you like bad boys, then you might find yourself getting assaulted or exploited or treated badly. Certainly not treated with respect. But because I met the goddess before I lost my virginity, which is really, that's not, real common. It had a certain powerful impact on me. And so therefore, I basically believed that I needed to know that a woman was interested in me in order for me to have designs and interest in her. I mean, I could admire someone who's beautiful and attractive to me, but I didn't hit on anybody. I didn't believe that was really a good idea. It wouldn't make women feel safe around me if I was that way. So I tended to deal with women and people around me as respectful individuals, and that really put me into a terrible disadvantage because an awful lot of relationships, especially back in the 70s and 80s, started by a woman being hit on by a guy or another guy being hit on by a guy, um, with a certain predatory mindset. And there was a game to it too. And I never could really get it. So I stayed single until my late 50s. I had relationships that were really bad relationships. I was generally treated poorly. I found myself in situations where I was having relationships with women who were already married, or who had a boyfriend, and I was sort of I was sort of Frater Barrabbas on the side, right? I can go work magic with Brian and get him all worked up and all that stuff, and then leave and go home and have sex with my husband, that kind of thing. So, I mean, that was the kind of situation that I was in for years. And there was reasons why that was set up. I mean, there was a mental process that I was very much caught up in that I had to break. And once I broke it, that's when I was able to meet my current wife and start to have a real relationship with her. One of the things that really caused me a lot of issues is that I had such a powerful, intimate relationship with the goddess, that meant there wasn't any room in my life for a woman. And that was another problem that I had to learn to deal with. If you look at my astrology chart, I have Venus and Saturn in Scorpio, um, in the fifth house. um, and in between them, they're not conjunct, but in between them is the part of fortune. And so this is a really tough placement, for having relationships. of meeting people and having equal sort of relationships. So I tended to get abused, and I tended to be on the receiving end of women who basically decided that they wanted to dominate someone. Because I was a gentleman, I believed that I should not use my own masculine power or force or whatever to dominate someone. I just felt that was, I felt everything should be voluntary. People who really love each other should be mutual in their respect and regard for each other, and they shouldn't have to, play these idiotic games. And unfortunately, my entire peer group didn't agree with any of that, whether they were men or women or whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
So, I spent quite a few years living by myself. I wasn't an incel or anything like that, where I hated women or whatever. I loved women. I worshiped the goddess. The goddess is my personal connection to everything spiritual and magical for me. For me to do something like assault a woman or exploit a woman and all that would be going against the goddess herself. And I know that I'd have my ass kicked magically and spiritually if I engaged in something like that. So, anyway, that's my take on sexuality and spirituality. As far as sex magic is concerned, I'm always asked this question. Well, what about sex magic? And everybody wants to know about sex magic and all that. So what I say to them is, well, if you want to learn how to master sex magic, you need to, number one, you need to know magic. Okay. Apart from sexuality, you need to know magic. Then you need to know sexuality. You need to have a partner who can do this with you. And then, so you got these two pieces. You got, a really good relationship, a really good sexual sort of energy going, and a real understanding and a mutual respect. And both of you can assume an associated deity, And on the other hand, you've got, you really know what you're doing in terms of magic. So then you just pull the two together. When both of those are in a position of strength and power, then you can pull them together and you will produce some tremendous magical energy. And you will definitely have an impact on yourself, on your partner, and on your material world around you and the people that you know. I mean, just
Yeah.
But you have to have that knowledge. So you don't just pick up a girl and take her to your temple and work sex magic with you.
Not
You'd
quite
be
like that,
surprised
yeah.
how many ceremonial magicians this is in their mind, Why, I've been working all this magic, so I'm just going to get a girl and bring her in, and work magic. Like, okay, what is she going to do? And what does she get out of this?
Mm-hmm.
It's just completely crazy stuff. Beavis and Butthead, like the. I had this friend of mine who came up with a cartoon concept of Beavis and Butthead when they're older, and they happen to be into thalamic magic, and they're so ceremonial magicians, but they're so crude and obnoxious that they can't find a girl, so they use a blow-up doll for a high priestess. He was telling me about that, and I think I think my drink almost went through my nose. So it was pretty funny, but it gives you an idea that this how you approach this in reality, as opposed to how people imagine this to be done, are two completely different things.
Yeah.
You want to talk about sex magic? Okay, learn magic, learn sex, develop a good relationship, then maybe you'll be able to bring the two together.
Yeah, I mean, it still has to involve consent and respect.
And mutuality.
Yeah.
Both people have to be on the same wavelength in order for the actual outcome of this to be optimal.
Yeah.
Because if it's just you, if it's just the guy, doing his thing, doing his magic, and the woman is sort of like, why am I here? Oh, I guess, because he paid for my dinner, and because there are expectations that, I need to make him happy or satisfied with me or something like that. I mean, but otherwise I have no clue what the heck he's doing. That just doesn't work.
Agreed. Oh, well, Brian, I guess. Thank you so much for joining me and for being on the show and sharing your wisdom. And good luck with all of your myriad book launches this year with your new publisher.
Yeah. And, if maybe we can meet again when some of the other books come out.
Sounds great.
We can talk about transformative initiation, or we can talk about the Nephilim.
The Nephilim sounds pretty interesting. All right. Well, take care. Thank you.
Okay.
WitchLit is a production of Thousand Volt Press and is edited by Julian Rashke. Our intro music is Cosmic Glow by Andrew Kay, and our outro music is Voices by Alexander Shenekar. Transcripts and all our previous episodes are available at witchlitpod.com, and you can follow us on Instagram and Threads at witchlitpod. Please help other witches find us by leaving a rating or review wherever you listen to podcasts. Thank you for listening to and reading WitchLit.